You're listening to Truth Talk, real talk, real faith. Each week, we take on some of the biggest questions and challenges facing Christians today. We'll unpack mysteries from the Bible, examine how they relate to historical discoveries, and connect everything to what's happening right now. Stick with us as we journey through biblical history, connect our faith to the world around us, and address the questions that matter most.
Hello. Welcome to today's episode of Truth Talk, Real Talk, Real Faith. I'm Mandy, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Bruce Gordon, another of your co-hosts.
We got producer extraordinaire Dale Lackey with us as normal because neither Dad nor I know how to run any of this equipment. So we leave that to Dale. He could probably teach me, but I'm unwilling to learn at this point.
Agreed.
So
I mess with perfection.
He tells us, hey, I can't do it this date. Let's do it this date. And we're like, okay, we'll meet your calendar.
We're going to get him a T-shirt that says the boss.
That's right. That's right. That way everybody knows who's actually in charge of this stuff.
Yep.
So,
what time can y'all meet?
That's right. So we are meeting this week on a Sunday night, November the 2nd, because we are the last election. Haven't we held one election here?
Last was presidential. Correct.
They voted here, right?
This first time.
Oh, this will be the first time? I thought we had to.
Nope.
Okay. So they have recently, so I'm not just rambling, this goes with our topic today. So recently, the voting, what's the word for it? Poll. It's not a poll. It's it is precinct. And Worth County has changed. So they have kind of changed some of the, especially out in the county. So changed some of the precincts because some of the ones that had been in use for a long time just were not up to the standard as far as facility-wise that you want people to be in all day long, especially your poll workers. So, you might want to, that's just it. That's a lot of people have made comments about why they change all that. And that's because a lot of the places had been the precincts that had been there for a long time. And so they were trying to find places that had more parking accessibility, had more accessibility for people who maybe have some sort of impairment, disability, anything like that, easier to get in and out of. And they have actually ended up using a couple of different churches, and Antioch is one. So we will, once we leave tonight, we as a church won't be back at our facility until Wednesday because we will be turning into a voting precinct tomorrow, and so we have to they have to have privacy and security for that, and we're happy to do that. We're happy to support that effort. And I just, to start off the show, it's funny. I was on social media, and someone mentioned that they had seen that several churches had been asked to be voting precincts, and they're like, isn't that a separation of church and state issue? And I was like, no, that is not what that is. And that, that just this is what we're talking about. Some people do not understand what the meaning is, some of the terminology that's used, and how that impacts our freedoms and our expectations of our freedoms. And so that's kind of what this episode is about. So we won't be for those of you who love our archaeological segments, which I'm sure is just vast and all around Worth County, people are listening to us.
It's going to leave a hole in their lives.
I know, but we'll be back to that. But we are going to spend more time talking about our current event, which is this week this is election week, election day, so we're going to talk a lot about just voting in general, the history of how we got here as a country and how we are different and set apart. Maybe we'll get into that separation of church and state just a little bit there at the end if we've got time. It's just according to how that runs. And then, the hard question will be kind of centered around that. So what do you do with this information. So I don't want to get too far down the road. So Dad's going to kind of give us a brief, and by brief I mean maybe less than 15 minutes, overview of, what the geopolitical world looked like over the span of our world history, and then how the formation of America is different. And I'll interject if I want to add any comments or anything.
Or if I need correction.
Well, I don't normally correct, but I was like, well, if you think about it, this, like, what about this? So on your mark, set, go, Dad.
Yeah. Because we're going to do a very brief overview, there's much detail that you could dig out and try to get to, and that's a good project for anyone. But we forget how blessed we are in America to have the freedom to vote. We take it for granted. We don't use it as we should, and I think it's because we don't understand the privilege that it has become. So we look back, we see in the history of the world, no civilization has had the ability to exercise its citizens and them actually govern themselves. And that's what this experiment is, a self-governing system. And so if you go back, I suppose as far as we should go back, it is that we go to the Greek world, which is the beginning of a democracy.
That's kind of more modern. Like the Greeks would be where we kind of get out of that ancient civilization type
feudal,
mindset and all that, and
city-state,
you move into more your modern civilization.
If you can call 400 BC modern.
Right.
But yes, I agree with that. The Greeks were very thoughtful. They set up a society that was based on certain well-known principles and called themselves a democracy. Of course, a democracy is just a mob in action. The most folks that can get together on any one subject rule. And that's what caused a lot of the demise of the Greek city-state world empire that was there. But they laid down the first principles of a really, like you said, organized civil government.
And let me just pause right there. That's the first time you've stated that like that to me. I want to wrap back around to that thought when we get to the United States of America and our current climate, that whoever, the mob rule.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to put that in your brain.
Yeah, and of course, I accept out of that the government of Israel. It was certainly a God-given theocracy, and then was ruled by judges and then ruled by kings. That was certainly a civilized world, but I'm talking about the type of the modern
concept of a government.
A government,
yeah,
for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that evolved the Roman government, which was not a mob rule. It was a selected few rule. At times it was the Senate. For one little time, it was the Praetorian Guard. Mm-hmm. I think that's what they were called. Not the Praetorian Guard. It was the guards that guarded the Caesar. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, it was dictatorial through the Caesars for most of the time. But
sorry, he's saying the Caesars because Caesar is a title, not a name.
Yeah, folks forget that.
So everyone's like, oh, well, Caesar said et tu, Brute, right? Yes, well, Caesar Augustus.
Yeah.
So Caesar is a title and not a proper name.
That's correct. And so, but they did have a formalized system of laws that were in effect that did carry a good, especially for the upper class, a good bit of freedoms and responsibilities that came with them. So between the Greeks and the Romans, we got the basis of
a government. And you see that, and the reason you can see that in both the Greeks and the government is because of how and the reason we call that modern civilization is because they are the ones who started standardizing rules, laws, when they were not, that wasn't like their land. Right. They were conquering other land. Nations were much more tribal then. So whatever area that you could kind of rule over and everything. And yes, that's still true, but they were able to take over lands and conquer lands, especially if you read like what Alexander the Great did and everything, and how he kind of modernized his army and his approach to gaining territory and everything. And then that takes over. You see it much more well orchestrated with the Roman government, and they put in rules. They did things like what Rome is known for, like paving roads,
right.
and by paving, we don't mean like we do today. They're carving out roads. They're establishing a boundary road, aqueducts, infrastructure. That is what they did well in these areas they took over. So it made it easier for those governments that were either Greek or Roman to maintain their authority in that land.
Yeah, because at least the citizenry saw some benefit of the taxation that they were getting when they had no say about how those taxes were going to be used. As we look at the Bible in the time of Jesus and that period of time, that was one of the major problems, was the collection of taxes and how they were used. But you didn't have a choice and you didn't have a vote in how things went. So that then fell into somewhat disarray through what we call the Dark Ages. That period of time as Rome fell and there was no overall
one strong government.
Pretty much the Catholic Church was the government for 700-800 years during that period of time. And so out of the Dark Ages came the next period of enlightenment with the printing press and with the things that started to happen. And so society began once again to question, well, why should I do what you say? And we came through. The French were the first, and then the British after them, formulating systems of ruling over their people. Though both were monarchical, they had kings. They still had like the Houses of Parliament, the upper and lower, the Commons, where there was at least some form of representation for someone besides the dictator or the king at the time.
But only if you were people of means.
Correct.
If you were of lower class, if you weren't gentry, right. Or anything in the aristocracy, then you weren't represented. Now, they called themselves representing. And I will say, those lords, I'm going to use more English background just because I'm more familiar with that. Those English lords who were decent people were good overseers, stewards of those people who served up underneath them. They were, a lot of them were, they weren't servants, but what do you call it when, not vassals? Anyway, they were good stewards of their lands and everything. Their people worked for them,
right.
So they were able to work the land, yes, some of that went to the person who land it belongs to, but you were able to keep what it took to take care of your family. Yeah. And
so hard work would pay off.
Serfs is what.
So hard work could pay off.
Yeah.
In that case, where previously it didn't matter what.
But if you had a terrible person,
then you have a problem.
It was like slavery, really. Mm-hmm. So, which is what was very common in other areas of the world at the time. But still, you kind of had this hierarchical church state.
Right.
In some areas, like France, very much so, was a church state. And somewhat up until, I guess, the French Revolution, it stayed that way. I mean, it was very much run by the Catholic Church,
France,
or Roman Catholic Church. Not I don't say Catholic, but it's Roman Catholic Church. Right. And if you know anything about history, it was a very war-torn time between these governments,
right?
Because
especially the French and the British and the Spanish, those were the three major powers that warred with each other, and their lords tried to reign over. The Normans, which were the French, and the Saxons, which were the British, constantly were at war with each other.
And then you got the Habsburgs, which are German, but they were usually with the English aristocracy because they had intermarried so much within the German
nobility.
Yeah.
So we saw those things brewing. Then, of course, came the discovery of America, which we call the New World.
Let's back up and say a lot of that changed with the Reformation.
Right.
So the Reformation was it's the end of the Dark Ages.
Right.
And the beginning of, the Reformed age, basically.
Right.
I almost call it the Enlightenment, but that's more of a term for like art and that kind of thing.
Right.
But so when in the 1600s, when Martin Luther nailed those 95 Theses on the door of the church there in Wittenberg,
Germany. Yep.
And
or if we say it right, Wittenberg.
That's
the
right.
W is a V.
But we're American,
Yep.
and we don't have to, pronounce things right. No, I'm playing. Nope. That's a whole other social media trend. Don't lead me down that path. So that is the beginning of when change really started sweeping through the nations,
right.
through Europe.
Governments began to be challenged because they would most times, for different reasons, try to squelch the Reformation, because a common man was now reading the Bible and saying, oh, well, these are freedoms I should have. I am a real person. Right. I do have value. And so things began to be questioned.
And you had, and there's all kinds of, and we're trying to lay this good foundation because, there were things that were happening within the populace that they were beginning to be enlightened about how things were not fair for them. You got the Corn Laws in England, all these things that were keeping the poor people poor and poorer, but propping up the nobility.
Right.
And so, why should you be drains on society? And so this was very populist movement and spread, especially there in Germany, in those Nordic countries, Denmark. That's where your Quakers and your Puritans and all that, they came from those
migrated from there to England and eventually to America, and sometimes directly from Germany and those places,
and Denmark and all those.
Right. So
that's why when you listen to people who are those descendants would be probably your Amish, Dutch. That's why they were Dutch, because you got your Pennsylvania Dutch, right. And all that kind of stuff. Those were your Puritans and your Quakers and all that came over. I guess Quakers are, an offshoot of Puritans, maybe.
Yeah.
And so that's how that develops over, as it affects the formation of the new world.
Yeah, and the principles it's going to be laid upon. So all that was brewing in a world that was becoming more mechanized. We hadn't quite gotten to the Industrial Revolution, but the foundations of that was being laid. People were questioning more. They wanted more religious freedom. And so as we then come across to the New World, of course, we had the French were settling the Canada and northern United States. Spanish were in the southern and western United States, and the British scattered in the midst of them in New England and Pennsylvania and slowly into the Virginias and eventually into Georgia. And so as we had these groups coming to these places, they were now distanced from the homeland and from the rulers. And so they began to question, why should these folks do the things that they're doing to us, demanding us to serve them, demanding taxes. And you had this overwhelming feeling among many that this was a place of freedom. And so that began the process that eventually brought us to where the United States, which was primarily at the time, the 13 colonies was British. And so as they began to formulate a government, they began to think, how can we see what was good in these former institutions, but how can we deal with the things that were wrong? And so they came up with the idea of a constitutional republic.
If you want to have, I just want to give a recommendation here. we like history, and so we like reading about history. If you want to read a fictional book that gives you a really good view of why people were coming to America, what was going on in Europe and all that, there's a book that you and I recently read by Jack Kavanaugh, and it is called The Puritans.
Right.
And Dale can put a link in the show notes. And now let me preface that recommendation by saying the first, I don't know, how many chapters in this book?
It takes some time.
There are 28 chapters in this book, and so probably the first 10 chapters, it is tons of history. So if you're not captivated by that, slog through it, because I told Daddy, I was like, I'm going to give up on this book. But it was really, 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 really good. And it helps give you that, like, if all you have is your government course from high school or, whatever class you took in high school that kind of gave you the history of the world and that kind of thing, there's so much left out of that. And there's not enough color to it for you to really captivate it and understand why America became what it was, like the persecution and how the church and the state were intertwined and everything like that. So I really recommend reading a good book or doing, if you like research, do some research. But this is a great fictional book that's got some historical truth to it. I mean, the historical truth is there. Some of the characters are fictional.
Yeah. When it speaks of history, it's using the history. I'm on about 5 books down now, and we are in the end of the 1800s. And so it's moved all the way through how America was founded and even out going west and dealing with those issues all the way through. So it's a good series of books. I don't know how many.
You on The Patriot?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I personally gave up Jack Kavanaugh because he's so historical.
Yeah.
So I got the Puritans and the Colonists, and I may give The Patriots a try. The Patriots is the third book though.
No, I'm well past that.
The Pioneers.
The Pioneers is where I'm at. Yeah.
So the names of the books are like the Patriots, the Colonists. I'm sorry, the Puritans, the Colonists, the Patriots, the Adversaries, the Pioneers, and then it takes you all up to past World War I.
I don't know. I hadn't got that for you.
Because the Peacemakers is the final one that it shows here. But anyway, they're great historical fiction that
he weaves a good story, but it is sometimes difficult to.
He's always got lots of characters. Okay, I didn't want to get us off track, but this first one was excellent. It really wasn't 10 chapters in. It was probably like 5 or 6 chapters in, but because he's setting the stage.
You have to set the stage.
Every book he has to set the stage. So the first few chapters are always very detailed and everything. So
it's worth the read
it is if you enjoy reading and that kind of thing. But this particular book gave me so much extra about the founding of America.
Right.
And I think sometimes those of us that are American have this very romantical view of Europe and especially English aristocracy and everything. So I think we need sometimes a fact check, about like this. Well, it wasn't very romantical if you didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah, if you wasn't one of them, you were in trouble. So
okay, so sorry to interrupt again.
That's all right. So we're come to the place now where they're putting together government, and they come up with this idea of a constitutional republic that is actually a self-rule. So they start, second paragraph of the Declaration, we the people of the United States. It's we the people that have ultimate say. So that brings us to the place of how do we have that say? Now, you can go back and do a lot of discussion, and we don't want to bore you on that, or why those things were brought into the Constitution. A lot of it, if you go back, you'll find out it is from sermons that were preached by a particular person, and he espoused certain ideas, and they are part of our founding fathers' documents.
And who was that person?
I have forgotten his name at this point. I'll have to go back.
Jonathan.
Not Jonathan Edwards. It was
okay, that's okay. I'll look it up while you're talking.
Yeah. So inside of the constitutional republic, see, it says here we have decided that here are the core values of what we believe, and no matter how many folks come along and say we don't like that, the core values of the Constitution is supposed to be what we're governed by. And we can change those or add to those values by amending the Constitution, and there's a way for us to vote and to be able to do that. And so if you go back and read, though, originally, not everybody was going to be allowed to vote. They had a big debate about who would be the people. At one time, it was just those folks that own property would be able to vote. In some states had laws that said only those that had property would have a right to vote. But over a period of time, they worked through that and decided it was best for all folks, because certainly not all would be able. You would wind up with a rule of rich folks again if you simply let landowners vote. And so we did that, and so now by that we are actually responsible for those representatives. We endow them with our power by voting to go and stand for us and to govern by the principles of the Constitution. So
Thomas Hooker.
That sounds right. Yep.
He's not the only one, but he's the most.
Well, yeah, he was one of the ones that influenced them a lot. And so when we cry about the separation of church and state, if you go back and do just a little research, you'll find out that there was no such thing as separation of church and state. It was the church that influenced much of what we have today, being our self-government system. The separation Thomas Jefferson was talking about was not at all separating the church from having
influence
upon the state. It's
to keep the state out of saying, like you had the Church of England.
Right.
I mean, that was what in England. You had to be Church of England.
Any one entity exercising power saying we're the one or there's no one else.
That's right.
But it was also believed in that Christianity was the form of religion that best suited this republic. And because if we're going to self-govern ourselves, then we're going to have to live within those dictates, and the Bible and Christianity best enable men to be able to do that. And so if you read again the fathers, they over and over said, without a sound Christian, not religious, but Christian basis, this government could not survive.
And that is what all of our conservative political commentators and things like that, people who come to politics from a distinctly biblical worldview. Mm-hmm. You know, the American government system does not work for a non-Christian society.
Correct.
It is completely set up
for self-government
from a biblical worldview standpoint.
Right.
And I want to say the preacher I was thinking of was George Whitefield.
Oh, yeah. George Whitefield. All of those had influence.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that, especially when Christians want to have a conversation with somebody and they were like, well, our democracy.
Stop right there. We are not a
democracy. You are starting from the wrong standpoint.
We elect by democratic principles where every man has a right to vote.
We are a constitutional republic with biblical foundations and every. That's what I know a lot of people don't want to get into it, politics, the American Christian should spend time reading Americans' founding documents, go to Washington, D.C., and look at everything that James Madison wrote, and look at the things that Thomas Jefferson, who was not like somebody who you'd prop up as being the moral standard necessarily, but he understood the workings
and agreed with it.
That's right. The workings of government must align with a creator.
If you don't, you have to set up a dictator. A man has to have something that governs him, and if you don't have a self-government, then it will become a dictator. It has to be, because that's all that can keep evil, or they wouldn't see evil, they would see wrong in line. And so that's the reason you see dictatorial systems today in the world of lands that are not governed by the Bible, because there is not a system that will allow a true rule like we have. You have to have someone that has ultimate power, else you get mob rule again.
So that kind of gives us a history and why voting for the Christian, for the American, is so important. I mean, we've kind of laid the foundation in our first 20 minutes here. And so, voting is a precious responsibility. It's not just a right. Yeah. It's a responsibility to each other, to our system of government, and to our future. Right. That we maintain this special system of freedom and of representation so that all men are created equal. There is no other government in the world. Yes, there are some other Western nations who have adapted the American style of government, but most of them are not self-government styles. I mean, you elect like your parliamentary representatives in places like Canada and Britain, the UK, I should say, because they're one big conglomerate. Yes, while those are representational forms, there's a lot of like overreach and things like that. They will not listen to those people who have elected them. Right. Like they will make a decision based upon what their majority that votes with them. I was listening on the way over, and they were talking about, and this is where American politics have become more like that. It's our Republicans and Democrats want to win the next political whatever instead of wanting to do what's best for our government. That it's not really about what's best anymore. It's about what vote
who has the power
keeps the power.
Right.
And so and so we're regressing instead of progressing in both in both political parties, in my opinion.
Which means it is in the American people, because that's where the parties get their power from right now. Eventually, if we don't get back to where we should be, we will lose that power. That's the reason it's so important to educate yourself and then to vote based upon not what is best for me, what is best aligned with the Constitution and for our country. But unfortunately, most folks don't even know where to find the Constitution and have no idea how it's used to govern us. And that's one of the things the church needs to be doing. It is not unbiblical to teach.
That's right.
We're not teaching politics. We're teaching the form of government we are living under, and has been beneficial for now almost 250 years. So
as we lead up to the election that we see happening here. Now, there's not a ton of, it's mostly local government elections. And by local, I mean state. So there are some states that have some pretty important positions. Governor. I don't think there's any Senate seats open unless they're like filling a vacancy. Right. So it's not a major, like senatorial, like this next one we won't have. What is it? 2025. So 2026 will be your major Senate elections. Right. And then 2028 would be another presidential and your House style elections and everything, because they check and balance each other. So they happen in off election cycles, national election cycles, so that those checks and balances stay in place. But there are a lot of local things that you should be aware of, like depending upon where you live. Like here in our area, there's not like a ton of local things. Like we are voting. However, I think mostly nationwide they must be voting on mayoral candidates for the most part, because like I know we're voting on a mayoral candidate, and New York City is definitely voting on a mayoral candidate. So, but there are, but then you see in other states there are a lot of gubernatorial elections as well. We don't have one yet, but in a lot of states there are a lot of gubernatorial, and those are important, and you should educate yourself. And we see this slow drift towards socialism, which is the complete opposite of constitutional republic. And it gives someone else the ability to decide for you and to govern for you. And, I know a lot of young people look at a candidate like Zoran Mamdani in New York City and think, well, he just wants what's best for, the young people and for the people in his town. You can't, it all sounds good until you dig down into the weeds of it. You want to go to the grocery store in Cuba?
Yeah.
Because you're lucky to find anything on the grocery shelves in Cuba, because capitalism only works in a free society.
Right.
And all these people, I was watching a guy, like one of those man on the street interviews, and this young college kid was asking, like, do you believe, in a more capitalistic government or a more socialistic government? And all these college students, well, I think a more socialistic government where everybody's getting a fair shot, and da-da-da-da. And he's like, okay. And then he asked the question, he said, well, how about in, like, what's your hardest class? And they're like, oh, it's so-and-so. And he says, what about in that class if there's a wide range of GPAs in there? And so instead of you all having your own GPA, we're going to establish the GPA for the class. Mm-hmm. And so that the students who have a low GPA, you're going to share your GPA with them so that we can make sure the GPA for the whole class is equal. Yeah. And fair. Yeah. And those college students were like, well, no, I don't agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I have to study and put my time and effort in. Yeah. You think? That's right. That's exactly how the real world works, And I think it's time. I mean, you got to have those conversations because do it in a way that people can understand. So that right there is like these kids were tripping all over themselves to say, well, I still want socialism for like work, but not for my GPA.
Say, well, okay, so you go to work and you work hard, proud of what you do. And then you've got another fellow that comes in late, shows up part-time.
Or not at all.
Or not at all. But come payday, they take y'all's salaries and average it out, and all of you get the same thing. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Right. Mm-hmm. So, and I think what the church can do better at is providing some of the social structure that people have become dependent on. But I read another article that was saying that people would rather have their benefits from the government because the government is nameless and faceless. And you don't have to come get your food from people who live in your community. Right. So I think it's time, though, for these hard conversations about what it looks like to support your community, what it looks like to provide for those who are less fortunate and who cannot work or who are innocent in the system, but hold those that can to the same, standards that you are held to as well.
So if you're not willing to work, if you're not willing to do what, and you're capable, then you're just on your own. We're not going to work and help someone that's totally capable but just lazy or selfish or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that would curb a lot of that of the problems there. Lovingly take care of those, the Bible says, widows and orphans, those that are truly widows even. So the standard's pretty high. You should provide for yourself at all possible.
And the church really needs to do a better job of being that representation, this is a great, transition into our next segment where, we're looking at that hard question. So, we want to think, what is our responsibility? So what is the Christian response to, when voting, I guess, when voting doesn't go our way? When we look at our political landscape and we don't see our worldview reflected in those who are now our leaders. And that could be, so that's the Christian question. Everybody has to deal with that. Whether you're on the other, if you're a atheist or a socialist or whatever, that's the same question. But for us, the hard question is always about the Christian life. Mm-hmm. So if somebody happens upon our podcast and think like, it's how are we as Christians to react when our political landscape does not reflect our worldview?
Yeah, and I think, again, not wanting to be too repetitive, but when you go to the world like Charlie Kirk was in, where they're going to the campus, you have to go and confront the world and present your case and say why what I'm saying is better than the other alternatives, and win the people's minds and hearts rather than just saying, well, you're dumb. Mm-hmm. Why would somebody be so stupid as to vote for this fella up in New York?
And be winsome with it. Like that's where Charlie, and that's to me, I listen to Frank Turk a lot, and I love Frank Turk, but I don't always consider Frank very winsome.
Yeah, he's not soft.
But I mean, he falls in that category, but Charlie, I think, had a unique gift of connection, right. And he was able to be genuine, and Frank is too, but there was just something special about how his winsomeness, and everything, and not everybody has that, and that's just like some pastors. That's why you connect with some pastors and don't with others and everything, because there's some sort of ethereal, undefinable charisma type thing that allows a genuine connection with people.
Not everybody can be interesting, calm, suave, easy to get along with.
But make a very...
I was speaking of somebody, by the way. No.
We're not talking about Dr. Jones' daddy.
Okay.
But, we have to approach it the right way, too. So many of us fall into the trap of wanting to win an argument. And we talk about this all the time. And my Sunday school class talks about it all the time. We don't need to necessarily always win the argument.
That's when you get in arguments.
That's
usually.
Right. You can lay your point out for understanding without doing it in a way that makes it seem like you want to be confrontational or you want to walk away with a mic drop or anything like that. Like, be willing to walk away with an issue not resolved, right, or with a question unanswered, so that you can come back and have another conversation. Because ultimately, that's going to be the only thing that is going to allow two voices to coexist, right? Is if you're willing to say, well, I'm glad I had this conversation with you, and, it's interesting. Thank you for letting me hear your viewpoint. We're going to be really at two different ends of the spectrum on this, but I feel like I know better what you feel like and what you represent, and I hope you feel the same way about me. If one thing that I wish I could remember the name of the more liberal organization that does this as well. I heard about it this week, but that's what Turning Point does, because that's what Charlie said. When you quit talking, that's when the dissonance comes in. Mm-hmm. When you quit having the conversations, And so I think it's important that we as Christians don't back down from having those conversations. We have to continue to have the conversation.
And that can be difficult, especially if you're passionate about something. You have to really rein in that
your pride
and that desire to win. And the moment you find that you can listen to somebody that you totally disagree with and not interject and not stop them.
And not be offended.
But genuinely listen and begin to try to figure out what they're saying and how you when you need to respond, can do so in a Christ-like manner. Then you're beginning to enter in that place where you can be of some help.
Yeah. And then more practically, how the Christian is to respond is, we are given a commission to pray for those in authority, for government people.
Romans 13, among others.
And, just because, quote unquote, our side, which for the Christian, that's the wrong viewpoint, but if the person who is in political opposition to you and your worldview is in power, it's even more important that we pray for those people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they are our leaders, whether we like it or not. And, why would we not pray for those people? Why would we not? You don't have to agree with somebody to pray for them. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a president that I felt more in disagreement with than President Biden, than there's been several, but definitely President Biden's. Mm-hmm. It was just antithetical to the Christian lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Every minute of his presidency. But we had to pray for our country, for our leaders, just so that... From
him as a person. Mm-hmm. We have to value him, or her, whichever is in a place, as a person. You don't
As
have to
a
agree
image
with
bearer.
them. Right? You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to pray that, God, you'll just bless them and they'll have 10 more years of power.
Right.
But you do have to care about them as a person and pray that maybe they will begin to understand the place that they're in and the
Pray for their heart. Pray for softness, pray for gentleness in their spirit, and things like that would make them more amenable to listening to others and to valuing other viewpoints. Right now, we have, and this is kind of wrapping back around to what we said at the beginning, we have a very dogmatic political spectrum where each one wants to be the loudest voice. Mm-hmm. And if all you're doing is shouting each other out, there's nothing being resolved. And so we need to be willing to be the people who, show up to pray at events, to pray for our leaders, that speak publicly about our faith and how that fits into our political landscape. Because until we as Christians are willing to do that, it's never going to happen on the political stage either. I mean, we see kind of a movement right now because I think as a reaction to some of the things that went on during those 4 years and by some of the actions that have been taken by some Christian political movements. But we have to be super diligent to not take our freedom and our responsibilities lightly, and to be proactive in petitioning for those in leadership for us. Which
brings us back around to the reason we're talking today is one of the ways we can do that is to vote, but not just go into a booth and push buttons.
Yeah. You're not just looking for RD or I.
Right. Know something about the things that are there, whether it's a SPLOST, what is a SPLOST and what is it going to do, and should we be in favor of it? Who is the mayor? What does he believe? Really, all politics are ground level politics eventually. I mean, it's what happens to us right here. So the place we can most affect is right here, the people that we can actually speak to and talk to and have a part in. So voting. I talked with someone this past week that said they was done with voting. Didn't make any difference what I voted for. Didn't anything ever change. And I tried to do a little bit of reasoning, but you got to lay a foundation. I didn't have that time. Mm-hmm. It is important, no matter if it seems like for now it doesn't matter. If we'll do things the right way, eventually it should matter.
Mm-hmm. It's always a very high drama conversation. There's just a lot of there's a lot of personal feelings involved with things like politics, elections, voting, and things like that. And people are either very passionate or they want to walk away. There's kind of very little
middle ground.
Very little kind of like whatever. There's not very many people about it. So, but as for the Christian, our job is definitely to do the things that God has called us to do, to be active in our communities, to be responsible citizens. That's what being good stewards is all about. Good stewardship is not just in your family. It's not just in your field, or whatever. It's not just about the world that God gave. It's about everything every way that we interact with the world around us is stewardship. Yeah.
It's part of being the Good Samaritan. Mm-hmm. Who is my neighbor? Mm-hmm. And that is when we vote, that's part of it.
That's right. Well, we hope that, for the most part, we hope that if anyone's listening, that you have a better understanding of why voting is so precious and important and how we got here as the United States of America, and that this podcast is being released on Election Day. So we hope you have taken the time to get out and vote, exercise your civic duty and responsibility. And we hope you took time before you left to be in prayer about. I hope you were able to research a little bit and be in prayer about what your step was as a child of God, and be ready to do what it takes to be a responsible citizen that represents God and a biblical worldview in our nation. Thanks for listening. We hope you'll join us next time. If you're interested in a particular topic, if you want to talk about something with us, we'd love to have you join us on our podcast. All you have to do is let us know. You can let either Dad, myself, or Dale know, either in person at church, or you can reach out to us by email. That's connect@abcworth.org, connect@abcworth.org. You can drop us a message there. But we'd love to have you join us on one of our upcoming podcasts. Truth Talk, Real Faith.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you feel encouraged and equipped. Thank you for joining us as we explored these important topics. We look forward to having you with us again next week.